talk to us. Thank you. We are recording, so everybody knows that. So I am Dr. Nick Winges-Yanes. I lead the Critical Disability Studies program here at UT Austin. We do a Crip Conversations series where about every month, every other month, we have an event where we invite folks to come. And this month we were very excited. And I mean, I should just like tell people this, that like, you know, my lovely, amazing TA, it was just like, Imani Barbarin is coming. She is like the Beyonce of disability. And I want to put that out there because I was just like, yes, let's set the stage. No pressure. It's fine. Yeah. So we have Imani Barbarin. I'm going to read off, although most of you are already very familiar with her. She is a disability rights and inclusion activist and speaker who uses her voice in social media platforms to create conversations, engaging the disability community. Born with cerebral palsy, Imani often writes and uses her platform to speak from the perspective of a disabled Black woman. She runs the blog crutchesandspice.com and a podcast of the same name. She serves as the communications director for a nonprofit in Pennsylvania and is currently transitioning to be on her own to do more of this amazing kind of work that we're doing right now. I've been asked by my co-conspirator to make sure that folks also fill out a survey that has 2 questions just to let us know how we're doing for our funding. Always trying to justify our funding. Really quick, my pronouns are she, hers. Imani, you can let us know what yours are. And is there anything else I need to put out there? You're going to speak for a little bit. We're going to be talking about ableism and racism. I'm going to try to not talk very much because I want you to just like go off on tangents, pick on things that just light your fire. So I'm going to be quiet now and turn it over to you.
Hello, everyone. So as discussed, my name is Imani Barbarin. I'm a disability rights and inclusion activist, and I often talk about disability through the lens of race. And the two are so intertwined. People don't realize just how intricate the web of disability and ableism are connected, but they are. And every single day, our lives are dictated by both race and disability, regardless of what our individual race is. When I talk about ableism, what I am saying is ableism is the interpersonal, institutional, and societal discrimination against disabled people. And it's systemic, it's from the top. We are building systems to intentionally exclude disabled people. And when it comes to race, that's why. A lot of times, racism is the most disabling factor in a person of color's life. Racism in every single form is disabling. When we talk about environmental racism, children who are closer to highways and in inner cities are more likely to have asthma and most likely to be underdiagnosed or misdiagnosed with mental health disabilities. Trauma itself shows up in the DNA of descendants of slavery. We have medical racism. If your doctor does not believe you, the minute you say something is wrong, something is off, then they're going to wait until you're more disabled to treat you, if at all. Every single form of racism is disabling. So we must talk about the two at the same time. I grew up in southeastern Pennsylvania. I grew up in a fairly, I wouldn't say diverse, but there were a lot of Black people around, but in a fairly good area. And it is because of my family's knowledge of these intricate systems that I was even able to get diagnosed at such a young age. At 2 years old, I was diagnosed with cerebral palsy. And it was only because of other Black women that I was even diagnosed. My mom had been getting the runaround. My mom would take me to the doctors and they would say to her, "Oh, you're just hysterical. Like she'll be fine." I was limp. I was not moving until I was about 9 months old. The doctors didn't believe her. And so she went to other doctors and they said, "Oh, you're probably just making things up, or I don't really know about her. She's probably not, she doesn't know how to raise a child. Maybe that's just why her child, she's making this up in her head. My mom's like, no, she's not moving. And so then my mom went to church, and another Black woman who also has a child with a disability said, go to this doctor, go over there. He'll believe you. So I went to this doctor, Dr. Dabney in Pennsylvania. He was my doctor from the age of 2 to 21. And he said, no, you're right. There is something off. We need to have her checked out. And that's how I was diagnosed. It's an inherent knowledge that Black people have about racism and disability that even leads us towards the very few resources that we do have. When we talk about disability and race, we must also understand that society is built in such a way to exclude as many people as possible, knowing that racism is disabling. Knowing that racism is disabling. When we think of spaces that are built out of the crevices of society, they're not inherently accessible. So you rarely see disabled people in Black majority spaces because of where we're allowed to actually congregate. Oftentimes, they don't have the capacity for accessibility, but it is getting better. Race and disability is the legacy of this country. At the beginning of the pandemic, it was reported that Indigenous people, when asked for help for COVID, they were given body bags to service their community. Why the hell would they do that? But when you look at the statistics, Indigenous people have the highest rate of disability in this country. Our country knows just how disabling and just how deadly disability is in communities of color. And that is why we need to confront it head on. The fact that we do not have health insurance, universal health care, is due to the fact that during the Restoration era after slavery, during the Civil Rights Movement, that's when they began to attach healthcare to employment, knowing that Black and brown people would not get employment. They attached our healthcare knowing that. And that affects everybody, every single person. Racism is disabling, and it's non-discriminatory in who it disables. Oftentimes when we talk about disability, one of the biggest failings that we have as a society is we think of disability as a white thing. We're obsessed with that. We're obsessed with movies and TV and film that show disabled men, particularly disabled white men, almost like a fall from the inherent privilege that they are supposed to be afforded. But that doesn't tell the whole story. And that's on purpose. We see representation of disabled people as an experiment in just how far privilege can go, rather than an examination of what got us here in the first place. Racism is disabling, and we are erased every single day as Black and brown disabled people. And it is devastating. It is devastating our communities. Half of people killed by police have a disability. Half. 30 to 40% of people in jails and prisons have a disability. And the worst part, sorry, I have to go off on a tangent. The worst part about that is that you have the right to an attorney. You do not have the right to a translator for your legal proceedings. And entire cases get drawn out on the basis that people are not deserving of accessibility. Accessibility is a human right. That I believe that to my core. Accessibility is a human right. But as it stands right now, accessibility is charged like a luxury. When we consider the plight of the communities that are affected, if you're disabled, by and large, you're not allowed to have more than $2,000. These communities of color who rely on social safety nets, most of them are not allowed to have more than $2,000. So then when you treat accessibility and inclusion like a luxury, we basically shun an entire group of people. Racism and ableism go hand in hand. The thing that I want you most in your anti-ableism journey to recognize is the instinct you may not know you have. Now, being here in a talk for disability, you likely have evaluated it. You likely have confronted it, but in case you haven't, if nothing else, if you walk away with nothing else from this talk, I want you to question your instinct that says that if harm befalls a disabled person, that's commonplace, that's okay. Because what would we expect to have happened? That is the instinct that got us here. That's why we're on a Zoom call in February, 2 years into a pandemic, because too many people have this instinct that because harm befalls a disabled person, that's just a matter of fact. That's just a matter of how we live our lives. And it's not. That's the instinct that I want you to confront. Because when you get down to the brass tacks of it, when you think about race and disability and transness and disability and all these intersections with disabilities, that instinct to literally dispose of people because people have told you that that's just a matter of life for disabled people, that is eradicating entire races of people. A non-governing board of human rights activists just found the United States guilty of crimes against humanity on the basis of our access to medical care. Our medical care. They said that the United States systematically uses our access to medical care to eradicate Black and brown people, and that the genocide has never actually stopped. And we see it playing out every single day with this pandemic. We see it in the ways that we shun people from society, isolate them due to inaccessibility, and then charge them for the luxury of being a part of society. The luxury. Our health is a group project. And if anybody is left behind, if you think that the disabled people deserve to be left behind, that Black and brown people deserve to be left behind, your health is at risk. Be selfish. Your health is at risk. Race and disability dictates every single thing we do. And yet we are just now, as a society, coming to terms with just how much it impacts. I'm glad. I've seen stories from the pandemic of children, fundraising for their mother's oncology treatments. Why do we have an entire society that is okay with that? That a child, an 11 or 12-year-old, has set up a lemonade stand because we want to still have our hands, our grip on racism and disabling to control people that we find disposable. I want you to confront that instinct. I want you to evaluate that instinct, and I want you to evaluate it within yourself. Ableism most often shows up in the way we treat ourselves. That is our first indication of ableism. What do you think about yourself in this moment? If disability has befallen you because of the pandemic, if you are not, quote unquote, the athlete you used to be, what do you think about yourself? Do you think you're just not trying hard enough? Do you think that you're lazy? Are you comparing yourself to other people? Why? I like to joke that I will never walk slower than when I'm crossing the street, and mainly because a lot people like to, drive up on me and try to get me to hurry up. I will walk as slow as I want to because I've spent my entire life rushing with with the fear that I was holding other people behind because my disability was in their way. So I had to move out of the way. I had to get out of the way because I was going to hold other people behind. And I thought I was the thing that was most holding people back. So I would separate myself. I'd be like, no, I don't need to be out. I don't need to be around. Like, I don't want to hurt anybody else's chances of getting to where they're going. For what? Nobody told me that. I told myself that. I told myself that. Ableism is easiest to spot in the things that we do or do not do to not look disabled. Are you overworking yourself for fear that somebody else will find you disposable? Are you ignoring your health needs because your doctor's office hours are the same as your work office hours? Are you hoping things just get better because you're afraid to actually have an answer to the things that hurt and ail you? I want you to confront those two things, the instinct and your internalized ableism, because that's where the real work starts. Once you have more compassion for yourself, the more you'll have compassion for others, the more you'll realize that you are deserving of dignity and respect and hope, no matter your physical condition, no matter your mental condition. It's okay to be disabled, but it is not okay to be discriminatory because of disability or to hate yourself because of your disability. We need to confront that instinct that says, I'm not worth care. I'm not worth inclusion. Because how we treat ourselves is how we project onto others and how we exercise racism and bigotry, all because we don't want to be seen as less than. Thank you.
Thank you, Imani. It's really intense. And I'm looking at the chat, which is just all over the place, just loving this. So next, I have some questions for you. I want to let folks know that you can put a question into the Q&A. If you would like to ask Imani something, please put it there versus the chat so that we'll see it. Someone just put a link up for Imani's Patreon, so please take a look at that as well. So I'm going to start off with some questions that I sent you beforehand. But as always, if you're like, this makes me think of XYZ, go there.
Okay.
Yes. So I just want to acknowledge, like, having a talk about racism and ableism as a white cisgender person, like, I'm not the one to be asking the questions. So the first question that I have is, how does racism complicate our understanding of ableism regarding accessibility, specifically in post-secondary education?
So I think I have a lot of qualms with academia, and
Go for it. Yeah.
I think one of the things that I have an advanced degree, I have a master's degree, and I think working with the disability community, there is this sense that we use language, especially as a filter for disabled people, to keep disabled people out of secondary education, post-secondary education, or we kind of just demonize, AAVE and the ways that Black people express themselves, and then we have this threshold of language and academia, and it's kind of like all of a mess. And it feels like there's these ways that academia is just keeping people away from it. Like if people want post-secondary degrees, I want them to have access to that. But there's such a fear of being judged, of our productivity being judged, of our Blackness being judged in post-secondary education that people don't go for it. People are terrified, even though Black women are the most likely to have an advanced degree. And there's a lot of pieces of ourselves that we kind of hold back on for fear that it'll keep us from our academic goals. So ableism or racism in post-secondary education, it's all over the map. And I feel like, I'm trying to put my thoughts together. Like I feel like there's so many things that could be better, but people don't want it to be better because they like the feeling of, I've arrived at this point. I have this institutional authority. These people now validate me as intelligent, as proper, as productive. And I don't want these other people who are seen as less than to be a part of that as well. Otherwise, it will diminish my accomplishments. Does that make sense?
Yes. Sorry, I was muting myself because I talk as you're talking. I don't want to. Yeah, there's lots of claps there. And I think that going off of that question, I think that it speaks a lot to the productivity, right, of academics having to feel like if they don't keep up with certain like publishing and teaching and committees and whatnot, then they're not good enough, right? So they have this imposter syndrome on top of being in an institution that is inherently racist and oppressive to folks already. So then like they're already catching up to that as well. Especially when like the go.
Oh, sorry, I was just gonna say, and every other day I hear something about another disabled student, particularly if they're Black and brown, having their needs completely ignored by the university. So that really does send a message: you're not welcome here. You don't deserve to be here. That's really disheartening because I feel like disabled people are just, the disability community is the way forward, and a lot of people are completely ignoring us.
Yeah. So like when we're talking about, so like I think in many universities across the country, right, like the requests for accommodations right now are just skyrocketing for various reasons, right? Like in COVID, like various things have happened now that people are requesting accommodations that I think should have already been in place inherently as part of the classroom already in a lot of ways. So we're catching up to that, but then a lot of folks are also having to interact with a system that, you know, they don't see themselves represented as a disabled person or as a Black or brown person, right? And then also asking them to keep up with everything. So I think that there's like harm happening on these different levels while folks are trying to just get through, especially this existential crisis of COVID.
And I think there's also the issue of not just people who are newly disabled, but I think the pandemic forced a lot of people who were hiding their disabilities to say, I actually need these accommodations, which is terrifying because then you're fearful for discrimination which was the reason you were hiding your disability in the first place.
So we have, I'm going to pivot to a couple of questions that come in off of that particular question. And one of them is, this says, I see that you have an MA. Do you have any advice on navigating grad school or academia for Black disabled students who are currently struggling?
So, yes. So I got my MA, but I got my MA overseas. So like there was technically accessibility, but it was just very much so like carving it out of a wall, basically. Because there wasn't a huge ton of disabled students where I was going to get my master's. What I would say is really pay attention to how you work. A lot of times, accessibility, a lot of times Black folk in particular do not know what accessibility is available to them, or what they're entitled to, or even like how to experiment with accessibility, because we don't really have access to that. You know, a lot of these grants are not going to Black and brown neighborhoods. Kids are not being able to experiment with what they can use and need. So I would recommend like paying attention to your needs, researching tools that may be able to help. There are several universities I know that will purchase things under your recommendation. So do some experimentation. There are also, I don't know if you all have this at UT Austin, but at Temple University in Philadelphia, they have an accessibility lab. And so you can test out products like accessible tools and see if they work for you, right? Another good resource is Disability TikTok. There are several organizations that create TikToks on accessibility tools if you are not familiar with them. Additionally, have everything in writing. Everything in writing. Okay. I don't care if you met with the person in person, follow up via writing. I don't care if, it was during an assembly or during like a meeting, follow up in writing, have everything in writing, and make sure that you are communicating consistently with your accessibility coordinators. Additionally, there is an organization in every single state for protection advocacy of disabled children and disabled adults, everybody. So if you feel like your needs are not being met and you don't know how to advocate for yourself and you're afraid to, they'll step in and help you out. They're called protection advocacy agencies. There's one in every state of US territory, as well as for Native reservations. So if you're somebody who is terrified of having to advocate for yourself, or you have a lot of anxiety around it, you can reach out to them and they'll give you a play-by-play of what you need to do, what your rights are, as well as step in if necessary.
Our disability rights in Texas is one of our places here.
Yeah.
Pivoting off of that again, I have a really hard time sticking to a structure.
That's fine.
I was like,
first,
your communications person was like, can you give me like an outline? And I was like, oh God.
I'll try.
So when you're talking about like getting these, okay, first of all, we have the Texas Technology Access Program, which is housed within Texas Center for Disability Studies. That's where you can look at different support tech that you want to try out. Can email me later if you want to find out more about that. So that's our state place to find those resources. So you were talking about, figure out how to get access. What can you get? Like, given accommodations, and a lot of accommodations require a diagnosis. And getting that diagnosis again is like that, another barrier because of our healthcare system. And so you can take this question and put it to the side and answer how you want to, or you can like embed it. But the question I had was, you've talked about the far-reaching effects of talking about critical race theory, including things like sub-minimum wage and the lack of universal healthcare. So can you expand on that a bit, talking about healthcare and how that intersects with race?
Yeah, so in terms, I just wanted to touch upon like the diagnosis issue. The irony about requiring a diagnosis for accommodations or accessibility is that the Americans with Disabilities Act doesn't even require a diagnosis. So that's bothersome. But I think that, it's such a weird question to ask, because I get asked all the time, like, do you feel like Black children, children of color are overdiagnosed, or do you think that they're under? It's literally a mess at everywhere you turn. I see kids that are overdiagnosed. I see them misdiagnosed. I see them not diagnosed at all because of lack of healthcare. And then once they get a diagnosis, then they're put into like these very weird silos of care, and it may not apply to them. Like I saw one child, I think the mother did a TikTok, and they said that their child was bipolar, and it was like a 9 or 10-year-old. And then they went to another doctor. The doctor says this child is autistic. And so it's literally all over the map. And that really affects care on like a very basic level. If you don't get the proper care or the proper accommodations, then you're literally just running into a brick wall every single day with what you need. Additionally, diagnosis is needed for a lot of services, right? So the organizations that I just mentioned, they require a diagnosis when we do intake. So if you can't speak to that, then you're probably not going to get the help that you need. which is frightening to me because I'm like, like COVID-19 is a perfect example of a diagnosis that cropped out of nowhere and now needs to be addressed via the Americans with Disabilities Act. And the ADA was designed in such a way that it takes into account not having a diagnosis, and yet we have built a system that requires one, knowing full well certain people can't get it. Additionally, trans folks, every other week, I feel like we're debating whether they deserve healthcare, and that's bullshit, one. And two, it keeps them from the diagnosis that they need for also to have accessibility and accommodations. It's like a frustrating issue all around. Like I could variable about it all day, but yeah, somebody was saying not just diagnosis, but diagnostic tests, there's extra costs. And then you keep in mind that most people with disabilities, even whether diagnosed or undiagnosed, live in poverty. So you are having to save up money just for somebody else to tell you, so that you could save up for paperwork for disability for somebody else to tell you that you can only make $2,000 a month. So it's all a mess. It doesn't make sense. And we're really doing a disservice, particularly to communities without a whole ton of resources. And another thing that I really do find bothersome is, especially with disabled children, because there's a lack of diagnosis or because there's a lot of confusion about diagnosis, they go to these groups, these parent groups, they go to these parent groups that give them advice and all this stuff that's harmful to those children. So you also have the trauma of how your community is seen on the basis of your diagnosis or not having a diagnosis. So I could go on all day, truly.
But can you expand a little bit about that, like going to these parent groups and then getting advice that might be traumatizing, just a little bit? Because I think that folks aren't necessarily, what does that mean?
Yeah, so one of the things, a very blatant and violent example is, the autism mom groups that recommend, bleach enemas for children or torturing children to make sure that they, hashtag autism moms, the worst, and to make sure that their children, no longer exhibit signs of autism. My mom got caught up in that when I was a child, and not necessarily like the abusive part, but like the very intensive disability camps where we were having workouts 7 to 8 hours a day, to the point of exhaustion. And then we were being locked in an oxygen deprivation tank for an hour, or oxygen rich environment for an hour. And then like our oxygen levels were played with so that they can connect the synapses in our brain that were broken that made us disabled. So there's like, and it's very easy. Like people often talk about Britney Spears' mom learning about guardianship and all this stuff. And they're like, well, that's so out of the ordinary. I'm like, it's really not. A lot of these systems, a lot of the advice parents of disabled children get from each other. So it's incredibly commonplace for abuses to happen because somebody was promised a cure with one and they want everybody to know about it.
Yes. And next month is, we have Remembrance Day, March 1st, for folks who have actually been murdered by caregivers for disability. So there's a whole discussion to be had there. I'm looking at the Q&A and it's just kind of like expanded. So give me a to look and see. One of the questions that I had sent you beforehand, if I'm gonna stick to I made a plan, that you commented on a statement made by the CDC director in which she states that those who are vaccinated and have comorbidities experience more severe illness and likelihood of death. And you use the hashtag, my disabled life is worthy. So can you expand on how race is part of this discussion as well? And I will add that we were just notified in the Austin area that 95% of the COVID deaths in Travis County were with folks who had at least one comorbidity. But I haven't seen any information on race yet.
Yeah, so I heard, and I my parents have been telling me this, and I haven't really seen like a study on it, but what I heard was like 1 out of every 555 Black people have died of COVID. Um, and I don't know the data for other races, but data has shown that it disproportionately affects communities of color because of, like I said, healthcare access, um, and everything like that. And so when a official says that of the vaccinated, only a small portion of them died, and of those they were unwell to begin with, that's pretty shitty that's pretty shitty. You know, you think about people's lack of access to care and lack of ability um to have their needs met. And then you also think about like food deserts. If you live in a food desert, your likelihood of diabetes and hypertension and high blood pressure is higher. If you live next to a highway, you're more likely to have asthma and respiratory disabilities. So unwell to begin with really has a whole story behind it, and likely is informed by race and how we have systemically pushed people of color to the margins, disabled them, and then said, well, you're disposable anyways. So I I when I started the hashtag, I genuinely did not expect the pushback that I did from non-disabled medical professionals who were like, well, this is great news. Like, it's not great news to us. Because not only did we learn that we were quote unquote unwell to begin with, but we also just learned that even while vaccinated, you're 3 times as likely as a non-disabled person to pass from COVID, which is minuscule when you look at the larger picture, but still means a lot to us. And we're still hearing of, you know, disabled people who who are dying while vaccinated. We're still hearing of people who cannot get vaccinated, which I feel like also gets lost in the community, this like bipartisan communication about vaccines and masks and comorbidities, is that there are still people that can't get vaccinated, and that's not their fault. They're not anti-vaxxers. They genuinely are scared for their lives because they want the vaccine badly, but they don't want to chance it. Um, and a lot of them are people of color. And just on a tangent, like I feel like with race and disability, we forget the history of the experimentation on the Black community by the medical community, and then we message to them and say, oh, just get the vaccine. Like, nobody's putting, you know, whatever. And we've done that before. It's not unheard of. And there's a fundamental difference between white anti-vaxxers and anti-vaxxers of color, which is that white people, as far as I've seen, have always believed that the system will take care of them, have always believed that they are entitled to the care, and good care, to treat disability and disease. But Black and brown people have never seen that type of support at all. And in fact, have had their diagnoses used against them and experimented on and degraded. And then we give them the same message and we're like, well, it's up to you. It's not, there's an entire history behind this. And it frustrates me to watch people just like completely ignore that, and not message to the people in a way that makes sense given the cultural impact that the health community has had on Black folk. It drives me up the wall.
Yes. And I was waiting for you to get to that, because like there is this huge mistrust that has happened over and over and over again in the community. And also when you're talking about folks putting off care for one reason or another, because they're working or because they're, you know, doing, they don't have funds because of healthcare. They don't, you know, they can't get to the doctor. Like, all of these things mean that that person might be getting sicker and not be able to do anything about it. And then if we're talking about vaccination, I mean, like, all these things kind of come into play, and we can't look at it as if it's just this one issue. Like, right. It's just this one refusing to get the vaccine. There's so many historical, contextual points that we need to take into consideration.
Yeah, and the anti-vaxxer line of, you know, it's always their entire philosophy is it's better to be dead than disabled. And when you apply that to people of color, when you look at history, how have we treated Black and brown disabled people? You know, society's literally told Black and brown people it is literally better for you to be dead. And while that's maybe a belief system of people that have never experienced that, it is very much so a reality for a lot of communities.
Yes. Could just keep going on about history.
Yeah.
I want to do that. Of how folks have got here. I love that you're like also bringing up like the highways and like the asthma and where neighborhoods are placed and like who, yeah.
And I just want to, because you're a history buff too, I'm so sorry, but I just thought of this. Somebody tweeted the other day that they wrote an academic paper on the doctors of the KKK and how they would basically kidnap Black people to experiment on them.
Yeah, okay, yeah. And
I want to read the paper. I'm just letting you know it exists. So if you get your hands on it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Like I've been obsessed with the book Medical Apartheid for a while and adding it into the discussion because it's not discussed as a disability book, right? But then we have so many instances in there of looking at folks who had a disability and then were experimented on, right? We're looking at stories like Black Stork and all these different things. And yet still, this comes as a surprise to so many folks of how there would be distrust and how there would be this historical trauma of accessing medical care.
Mm-hmm.
So yes. Is there anything else you would like to say about that before?
No, I'm good.
So we have a lot of questions that have popped up into the Q&A. So can you see the Q&A too?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay. So if there's one that you're like,
I want to address the one that asked me about my internalized ableism journey as a Black woman.
Okay.
I think that's a good one.
Okay.
So in terms of working through internalized ableism, I really encourage people for like a week to like journal every single thing they do and why. Like every single thing. If you stand while doing your dishes, write about that. If you feel out of breath after walking somewhere, write about that. And then ask yourself, why are you performing certain actions in the way that you're performing them? Is it about productivity theater? Is it about feeling like you're actually moving and doing things? What is it about the actions that you're actually performing that are completely necessary versus what are you doing in order to feel like you are useful or worthy? And that's how you can kind of every single day address and give yourself time to relax too over things that you've been overextending yourself on. So like if you're rushing to do a project and the deadline's 2 weeks away, for what? Why? If you're overworking yourself and working 12 to 16 hours a day, why? What about what you're doing is necessary versus what is not? And additionally, understanding where you need rest is incredibly important. I believe in Audre Lorde's version of self-care, not Ariana Huffington's, like the girl boss like self-care. I believe in Audre Lorde's, which is like a very painful process of re-understanding yourself and your need to step away from something, even if it is painful. Your need to set boundaries for yourself. And you need to evaluate what is actually joy in your life. What do you actually enjoy? What do you actually want to do? And saving your energy for that rather than being productive for the sake of being productive and not feeling like you were disposable. Does that make sense? I hope that made sense.
Yeah, no, it totally did. I love the phrase that you use, productivity theater.
Yeah.
I like that. I'm gonna use this. We have a lot of support for the NAP ministry. Just FYI, which I was actually referred to a while ago, and it was amazing.
You're awesome.
I know. So the first question that we had on the Q&A was, Imani, hi, I follow you on TikTok and I love your content. You've mentioned in some videos that racism is meant to be disabling, which is 10,000% correct. I was making sure I got the right zeros. Do you think this logic applies to other forms of oppression? And is it fair to extend this thinking towards other systems of oppression, such as transphobia, misogyny, etc.?
Given the statistics, yes. I would say that, especially with transphobia and their level of access to healthcare, I see that most prevalent with trans Black women, and their lack of care that they get from the medical system, and just the fact that we legislate access to healthcare is absurd. Like, a woman's right to choose, or excuse me, a birthing parent's right to choose should not involve the government. And hearing the horror stories of what birth actually is, it's disabling. It's 100% disabling. And if somebody doesn't want to go through that, why are we forcing them to? So I agree that it does extend to other forms of oppression. I think that we have taken this formula as a nation to kind of do away with people that we deem undesirable. It's a formula, basically. And that's why there is no incentive for the US government to ever fund universal healthcare, because it is such a powerful tool to eradicate people that are not, quote unquote, American enough.
But it's insidious.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's not so explicit that folks can be like, this is on purpose. This is intentional.
Right. And we have a very much society, like a very ableist eugenicist society. Like, we are literally taught eugenics from a very young age, survival of the fittest. Kids who are left behind or who misbehave, maybe you're kept in at recess, you're not allowed to enjoy things. You're not allowed movement or exercise. Like, it's very insidious. It's literally everywhere around us. And when you think about how much of society is built around one concept, and you pull that little Jenga piece, people don't want that whole tower to come down. They're terrified of what will be revealed once everything hits the floor. And so there is a real denial of a lot of these systems, because a lot of what we do is unnecessary. A lot of what we're doing harms white people just as much as people of color, but they would rather believe that somebody is beneath them than own up to the fact that they have given up certain rights in order for those people to be beneath them.
Yeah, but then going back to like the post-secondary education, like, then you're told to get these degrees so that you can be the person who is on top. Like, that's the goal, is to get to that place and be that person, versus figuring out a way to demolish the entire hierarchy.
Yeah, and that's why academia has such an ableism problem, is because of that need to differentiate yourself and be like, I'm the valuable one in the equation. I'm the one that rose above. I'm the one that this institution deemed me worthy of have a place here.
Right. And then put yourself through this productivity theater I love this, to keep up, right? And then ignore your own needs, and possibly get sicker and sicker.
Yep, exactly. And when you think about, then you have the job application process, which purposefully discriminates against disabled people, then it comes full circle,
Yes. Yeah. Because there's some of those weird questions that like, must be able to lift like 20 pounds. It's like, why? What are you doing?
I see those like requests all the time. I'm like, what am I doing for you that I need to lift 20 pounds? You told me to move one database to another database on the same computer. I'm not lifting any more than that. Doesn't make sense.
And if you are, then this is not the job that I'm applying for. Like, that was not the job.
Exactly.
Okay. So looking again at the Q&A, because folks are just like really on here. There's so many. Again, Imani, if you see one that jumps out at you, please.
I have one that I can answer pretty quickly.
Okay.
Rachel asked, do you have any advice for disabled job seekers? There are several job boards that are dedicated to disabled people. There's a woman named Joyce Bender who does like employment consultations for disabled people. There's also the AAPD job board, the American Association of People with Disabilities. They have their own job board looking into disability organizations. Oh, and also if you want like experience in like a disability organization or like in the disability advocacy arena, join a board of an organization. They like are legally required to have a certain demographic of people with disabilities on their boards, because they receive federal funding. So you could serve on a board and get all that experience if you want to work in disability advocacy. I would just caution you that some boards require their board members to contribute financially themselves, but given that they are looking for disabled people, they're flexible on how much you have to contribute financially. So yeah.
Very good tip for boards, because I always wonder like if there's an amount that you have to give. Someone said, Ray said, are there ways we can support advocacy agencies or advocate for accessibility in community spaces, workplaces, universities, etc.?
Yeah, so if you don't, if there isn't like a disability affinity group, or if there isn't any sort of disability advocacy that you see, start a group, start running up surveys, start talking to people to see what their needs are. Making sure that you bear witness. Bearing witness is one of the most important things I could tell people to do. A lot of times what happens, and why I always tell people to write stuff down, is that people will gaslight you when you talk about your accessibility needs. They'll say, you never said that. I never heard you had a disability. You lied to me on your application, blah, 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 blah. So I always recommend having somebody around. Like if telling somebody, hey, I have this access needs, I'm going to go to my direct report. I'm going to go to the disability office. Can you come with me? Just so that there's a witness there. People act way different when they're being watched. So be the person that bears witness to that person's needs, and you will be, I'm telling you, it means all the world to that person. But yeah, making sure that you start the groups yourself. I know it's hard. It's going to be a slog, but I think that once you establish advocacy wherever you are, more people will join.
Yeah, I like that idea of bearing witness, just showing up.
Yeah.
Sorry, folks are. I love you. Who is responsible for owning the accommodations process? The onus often falls on students to go out and get the proof of their disability. So who's responsible for owning that process?
Realistically, it should be the university. What winds up happening is it's going to be the student. And that's, my mom, when I was like I want to say like maybe 7 or 8, my mom actually started making me go to my own IEP and 504 meetings to advocate for myself. Unfortunately, a lot of universities, a lot of organizations, a lot of companies, they don't care. They really don't. They're more interested in keeping the endowment up and costs low. You're going to have to be your greatest advocate no matter where you go. And I'm sorry that I don't have a better answer than that. But it has to be you. And that's why I say having people bear witness is helpful, because it takes some of that emotional burden off of you. It makes somebody with a third party view be more objective and feel like, somebody's in my corner, somebody gets what I'm talking about. But yeah, ultimately it's gonna have to be you. I wish it were the school. I wish it were faculty, but sometimes faculty can be wishy-washy. Some advocacy organizations could also be wishy-washy. It's gonna have to be you. You have to be your most powerful advocate. Unfortunately, nobody else will be.
So then I ask, and you can tell me if I'm like completely off base here, in having those conversations, maybe if you're having conversations with your supervisor or your instructor, whomever it is, talking about some racism that you might have felt in the classroom, you would want someone to be with you in that conversation, right?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much for any marginalized group, that advice still works, because we don't believe the individual, and it's easier to dismiss somebody when it's like it's a he said, she said situation, and when people turn it into a he said, she said situation. So I recommend highly, even in medical settings, I bring somebody with me.
Yes.
Because like, I'm like, please God, like, so like, cause I get bad news like every so often, and my instinct is to just laugh in the doctor's face and then completely forget about it later. Whereas when I have somebody with me, I'm reminded, you need to pick up this new medication. So yeah, just that's an incredibly powerful tool. Being in community is the most powerful thing you could ever be as a disabled person.
Yes. I love when you're like, I just laugh in their faces. Yeah, I sometimes have weird responses, and then I'm like,
I laughed the other day because my doctor was like, you know, your iron level is supposed to be 30. I was like, what is it? He's like, 9. And I laughed. The hell, what else am I supposed to do?
And then like, what are they, and then the medical professionals are like, okay, moving on. And you're like, no, wait, I gotta get through this first. So
yeah. Oh, I see Karen asked, is an Imani book coming soon? Yes, it is. It is. I will let you know once it's quote unquote official, but yes, it is. It is coming soon.
That is such an exciting announcement.
Thank you.
Oh, I love that happened. Okay.
Thank you. I'm excited. So I'm trying to keep it as hush hush as possible. Well, I mean, as mercurial as possible until paperwork is signed. But eventually, yes.
Yay. Oh my God, that's so exciting. Well, it's not so much now. Oh, wow. Now you've set off some chat. People are like, where's the pre-orders? Okay, so folks, we have 3 minutes, and I definitely do not want to like go over time because Imani's time is super valuable. And is there anything else you would like to leave us with? This has been just an amazing talk, and I just really appreciate having this time with you and you talking to us. And I hope I didn't talk too much or derail you in any way. But is there anything else you would like to leave us with?
Like I said, confront your own biases against yourself, because they will show up in how you view other people, and always question the instinct that says that disabled lives are not worthy, that things that happen to us are just going to happen regardless. I think that all of you are capable of doing that. And I think that all of you are also capable of building a community of support for disabled people and for yourselves that is necessary as we begin this new chapter of this American catastrophe. Well, I don't want to call it experiment, because, and not the word to use, but this American thing that we're doing. But community is going to be necessary. And so do away with the instinct that you need to be alone through all of this, or that you need to bear it alone, because that's not how things move forward.
Are you ending there? Because that's like about to make me tear up. Okay. Thank you everyone for showing up. Please remember to answer the 2-question survey that comes out for those of you who attended. Yeah, everyone, thank you. Lots of emojis happening and clapping. And yeah, thank you so much for showing up to this. I am going to stop recording so that I don't keep babbling and it's recorded. So let me do that.
Thank you, everyone.